Alright, big swim baits. Two kinds that I lean on in the fall, and sometimes one works better than the other. They're both really, really good. I've had phenomenal fall bites on both of these baits right here in years past.
Giant bites.
Yes. I'm talking about on this bait right here, I had one cast where I caught a 7-pounder and a 4-pounder on the same cast. How'd you like to have fish of that size class fighting over your bait? You know what I'm saying? Like, y'all get what I'm saying? 7-pounder on the back hook, 4-pounder on the front hook coming to the boat. Yeah, crazy. It's insane when they get going in the fall with that big swim bait bite. They, you know, little brief synopsis on why. Everybody knows when we get to the fall time of year, you know, fish school up and feed. Well, why do they do that? Well, I think the general consensus thought is that they do it because they somehow know that winter's coming and they won't eat very much because their metabolism slows down in the winter, which that's true. Their metabolism does slow down in the wintertime, and they don't eat as often because they're not processing what they take in as fast. That's true. But do you really think that a fish with a pea-sized brain will eat a hunk of metal and a piece of plastic every day of his life to the day he dies? Do you think that he really knows that winter's coming? Do you? I mean, all he knows is what's presented in front of him. And what gets presented in front of him is bait fish get grouped up because of temperature, daylight period, plankton, all this different types of scientific stuff is a little bit above my pay grade, but I know the bait fish get grouped up, and when a bass sees bait fish get grouped up, he can't help it. He just can't help himself, y'all. And so we see this, and most people, you know, pretty much everybody that fishes in the fall will be fortunate enough to run into those schools of bass and on those threadfin shad. Threadfin shad getting grouped up in these creeks, migrating back, finding what feels good, what works best for them. They get caught in there, the bass go to town on them. When you run into one of those schools, man, you can catch a bunch in a hurry. And it'll range from a 1-pounder to sometimes it'll be a 10-pounder. But most of the time it's 2 to 3 to 4-pound bass, and they're going crazy on these little threadfin shad that are grouped up in these creeks, or sometimes offshore. If you're real lucky and you're fortunate enough to fish a pond like we do all the time, you have the opportunity to potentially run into a group of fish that's schooled up on gizzard shad. And when them gizzard shad get grouped up in them grass backs and stuff in the backs of these creeks, and you find the fish that are schooled up on them, it is a special. It's what made this lake famous.
Yeah.
It's, you know, sitting there and catching 4 to 7-pound bass cast after cast. That's what made this place really, really special. And it doesn't happen very many places in the world. We're fortunate to have it happen here. But when they're doing that, there's just nothing in the world that looks more realistically like a gizzard shad than big swim baits. Now, how do I pick which one? Two things. One is, the main thing that makes my decision on this is the cover that's present in the areas where I can locate gizzard shad. How tall is the grass? How thick is the grass? How deep are these gizzard shad? How deep is this edge they're relating to? So once I find these gizzard shad, I got to know what depth they are, how the grass is growing, how much timber's there. I got to take all these factors in, like we talk about, paying attention to the details every day. I would rather use this treble hook bait, because this isn't your normal treble hook bait. You get to throw it on a big rod. The treble hooks are really big. You don't have to baby them with it like you do with a jerk bait or a rattle trap. You're not throwing it on light line. You got an 8-foot heavy rod and 20-pound line, so I can, man, when they load up on this thing, but I can bring them in. You know, I can lean on them and I can horse them in. And anytime I got 6 points, that's better than 1. That being said, I can't fish this deep. It just takes too long. It almost suspends. It's a very, very slow sinking bait, and most of these glide baits are. You can buy some that'll sink faster, but who wants to put a $50 to $150 lure and let it sink down 10 foot in a water column with a lake full of stumps? Anybody want to do that? I don't want to do that. So if the fish are relating to, let's say, deeper than 5 or 6 foot, if they're in a creek channel swing and the bottom of that creek channel swing is 8 to 10 foot, as long as it takes this thing to get down there, and as slow as you have to reel it to keep it down there, this is going to be my choice, because it's weedless. On the other hand, if they're really, really shallow and there's grass, and the grass is growing really tall, this is my choice because it's weedless. You follow what I'm saying? Like when I can get away with this in about 2 to 5 foot, I want to throw the glide bait. When I can't, I throw this. Okay.
Good lesson. Great. Help me.
Because both of these baits, and I'll talk about this here in a minute, both of these baits are almost weightless plastic type presentations. I mean, you fish both of these baits extremely slow. They stay in one place for a long time. Neither one of them is getting away from the fish in a hurry. And this is an important key factor when you're hunting big fish, guys, because when you think about these big, blowed out, fat, giant, double-digit class fish, they're lazy. Of all the big fish techniques that we know are traditional big fish techniques, how many of them are fast moving?
I keep needing you a fast.
Maybe a deep crankbait?
Situational, but no.
Yeah, but not a day in, day out big fish technique.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about flipping a jig in a creek channel, how slow does that jig move in that creek channel? Real slow. We catch a lot of big fish on a frog. Well, we catch those big fish on the frogs that are hollow bodies and we can sit there and do this. And it moves, but it doesn't really move, right? And those of you that follow have probably heard me say, I like movement without movement. What that means is I like movement without a lot of movement. I want it to do this and go real slow, which these two baits do phenomenally. All right, let's talk about, I'll give you real quick, rod reel and line, real simple. The biggest rod you own, put 20-pound or bigger line on it. And if it's real thick vegetation with this, like lily pad stems or something real tough, put 65-pound braid on the weedless one. If it's that thick, you're not going to be using the glide bait. I use an 8-foot heavy rod is the one I use. I like an 8-footer. That big long rod helps to lob these big heavy baits because like this is 1.75 ounces of just plastic before you even put a hook in it. Okay. The hook that you need for the convict is a 10-aught owner beast. I recommend upsizing the screw lock. This is not upsized here. This is one that came out of the package the way it is. But you can buy oversized screw lock from Eagle Claw, and you put that in there. It's going to, because when you got this in here, once you catch a fish or two and this plug pulls out, it's hard to fix that bait. It's hard to replace that bait. That bait is pretty much done at that point, and these things are pretty high dollar. So if you buy that oversized screw lock, it's going to help you save a lot of baits, and they're going to last a lot longer. And I'd like to thank Heath Taylor for teaching me.
And that's the one that he was flapping and right trying to break it off. And then
yeah, he actually had an oversized one on the hook, and he took the bait one night and was doing this.
How does he get it?
And it was just, it stayed on there. So really, really good deal there. All right, so this one comes out of the package ready to go with hooks. All right, you got the rod reel and line, you got the baits. Technique. We'll do convict first. Weedless Smash Tech convict. By the way, both of these are for sale downstairs if y'all want some. Weedless convict, really simple. You're going to make bomb casts with both of these baits. You're going to make long casts, and this is important because the long cast, bass will follow a swim bait more than any other bait on the market. They'll tuck in behind it and just trail it. I mean, and look at it for a long time. So it's important to make a long cast to give that fish time to follow and to give him time to make up his mind and commit. And what I've learned over the years is what actually happens is, and this is why the long casts are so important, when you throw that bait out there and you start reeling, one will get in behind it. And then another one will be like, hey, what's he looking at? And he'll get in behind it. And then before you know, you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 in there right behind your bait. And a lot of times when you fish a swim bait, you'll feel it. And they don't have it. They don't have it. What that is out of that group, one will nose punch it, try to make it stop swimming. And another one might nose punch it, try to make it stop swimming. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, one will come from the side and that's where everybody talks about how vicious that swim bait bite is. You're talking about a big, big fish that just swings out to the side and just T-bones that sucker and hits it so hard that if he goes the other way with it, I've literally seen him pull the rod out of people's hands before.
Sure.
Literally seen him pull the rods out of people. Like the hook set, when they hit it going away from you, it's not a hook set. It's like this.
Just hold on. Yes.
Like that's literally what happens. It's insane.
Awesome, right?
Yeah. So that being said, with the convict, we're going to take it out there. One important factor when you're fishing vegetation, point the rod directly down the line. I'm not talking about pulling it down. I'm talking about pulling it to the side. You want, out of your eyelet, you want your line coming straight out. So my line's pointing this way. I can't have my rod down with an angle like this. I can't have my rod up with an angle like this or to the side. Straight. What that will do is that will allow that line, you take all the shock absorption out of the rod. When you take the bend out of the rod, you apply direct pressure to the head of this bait. And when it's coming through that grass, if you have any type of shock absorption, it's going to allow that grass to kind of load up on that bait and will fold up on it. But if you put direct pressure, it will pop through that grass. It'll just bulldog right through it. So you're going to do that. And like I said, they will hit it a lot and not get it. The one thing that I can tell you is, on this conduit, when they've eaten it, you won't be asking yourself, oh, should I set the hook? You're going to be like, oh, that was a bite, man, has he got it? Like if you're asking yourself, does he got it? He don't got it. Because he's either going to hit it going away from you and it's going to be self-defense, or he's going to hit it so hard he's going to knock 3 feet of slack in your line and you're going to go out of instinct, because that's how, the bite's going to be violent when they eat it.
No doubt.
And that's, this one's really, really simple. It's more about locating the gizzard shad and the bass that are feeding on the gizzard shad, but you literally throw it out there, point right at it, and just keep reeling until there ain't no doubt. And then once you know, you jack them and horse them in, don't let them. You've got an 8-foot heavy rod, you got big line, you got a 10-aught hook, put them in the boat like yesterday. Boat flip them if you want to. I don't care if it's 10 pound, boat flip them. You better have a good rod though. You may ever seen me boat flip a 9-pounder? I haven't boat flipped a 10 yet, but I've boat flipped a 9.
Somebody made a post the other day that said on one of your videos, I just love watching Billy boat flip down big hogs.
If I got them coming to me and I got the right gear, I'll swing them. I will swing them. Alright, this bait's a little bit trickier to work. And we got any jerkbait fans here? People like to fish a jerkbait. Nobody likes to fish a jerkbait? Y'all are my people. I don't like fishing jerkbait either. But if you learn how to fish a jerkbait, it'll come in handy for this, because there's some similar stuff to it. So on this glide bait, this goes for any glide bait. This is the Smash Tech glide bait that they're selling downstairs. This one retails for $40. Very reasonable price for a glide bait if you get into glide baits. Glide baits can run as high as $300 and $400 at times. The most expensive one that I personally use is actually $150. The stock price for a good glide bait is generally $70 to $100. So $40 for a quality glide bait is a really good deal. I know that sounds crazy, but it is. Alright, so we're going to make the same long cast. Now we've got a more open area, right? So if we're fishing a glide bait, a lot of times what I like to look for with that is where that grass is growing, but there's a gap. So if I'm in, say, 6 foot of water, 5 foot of water, the grass is maybe growing 3 foot high, and there's 3 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot gap between the top of the grass and the surface of the water. That is 100% the most ideal situation to throw a glide bait. I'm going to make that long cast. So just imagine I've got a rod and reel in my hand. You can point this one down like you're comfortable with when you're cranking or whatever. So I'm going to make a long cast. One top secret trick right here, right? Don't tell nobody I told y'all this. One of the big things that you can get some bites on is kind of a little sneaky deal. A lot of people lob that big heavy bait out there and it hits the water and it just kind of settles and it starts slowly sinking. Right before that bait hits the water, and I'm talking about a split second, when that bait hits the water, if you'll thumb that spoon, it'll tighten that line and that bait will hit the water and go shoot and glide. Because these single jointed glide baits, they go like this. And when you snatch on them, they go shoot and glide way up to the side. So if you tighten that spool right as it hits the water, it'll hit it on a tight line and pull it back to you and it'll go. So if they're feeding aggressively and there's bass up there chasing, that bait drops in and goes shoot. They'll hit it just like that. It'll happen quick sometimes. So, alright, got it out there, got it in the water, got my first little deal out of the way. I can stop my spool. Now I'm going to start slowly cranking. And each glide bait's a little bit different with the speed it'll tolerate, so you've got to experiment with your glide bait. So what you want to do, what I like to do in the fall, is I want to go as slow as I can go and still make it do this. You'll slow down to a certain point and it'll just kind of come with you. But it swings in an S-curve action, so you want to go as slow as you can go and still make it wander. Okay? So it's going back and forth and I'm just creeping. And about every 7th cast, I'm going to go. I'm going to hit it twice. So it's going to...
7's reeling.
Yeah, every 7th cast. So every 7th turn of my reel handle. 6, 5, 8. It's different on different days. The bigger, wider open the area, the more reel handles, turns that I want to put in there in between twitches. The reason why is, when it's doing this and you're just slowly watering it, they're getting behind it. And so if I've got a big wide open area, I want to give them room to get to it. Give them a little more time to suck into it and get behind it. You're doing it, and you're watering like this, and you go, bam, hit it twice. Hit it pretty hard, because the big bait takes a lot to move it. But when you do this, and they'll be behind it, just swimming with it, watching it, and you'll go, and it, all of a sudden, they're swimming, and it just stopped and turned around. And it's in their face. And they've got to make a decision. At this point, they're going to open their mouth, or they're going to bail. If he bails, he probably was never going to commit anyway. So that's my favorite retrieve on a glide bait. Now, you can do a lot of different things with them. You can kind of, there's another retrieve where you just get it going like this, and you just take a big sweep of your rod. And what it'll do is you'll be watering, and you slowly start speeding that thing up a little bit, and then you pull that rod, that long pull, it's watering, and it goes. And so what it does is it gets them fish as they're behind it. Now all of a sudden it's like it's getting away, they chase it, then it stops, and it's in their face. Same deal. You see what we're doing? We're always trying to force this fish into a decision. You know they're getting behind it, you know they're following it, and they'll tell you pretty quick, because you'll see them. Watch. When you're throwing a glide bait, you'll know if it's the day to throw a glide bait within the first hour. Because if you throw it for an hour and you haven't seen one follow it to the boat, it's not the day to throw a glide bait. Because a lot of them will follow you to the boat and look at you. You'll actually see them right beside your boat. So what you're trying to do is get all those followers. You've got to force them into a decision. The only other thing that we do is when they're visibly busting big gizzards on the surface, when it's just going crazy, when you see them blowing up on big bait on the surface, I'll actually use this bait like a barely subsurface giant Zara spook. So I'll take that bait, make that long cast, and I'll hold my rod up, and I'll just instead of walking it down like I do a spook, I'll walk it up to keep close under the surface, and that glide bait will go. A real wide walk right on the surface. And if they're chasing big bait, boy, they'll come unglued on it. That's a lot of fun.
That sounds fun.
Woo, I spit it all out in a hurry. Did y'all catch all that? I know it was a lot.
Come on, give it up for Mr. Lawson. Seriously. I got some really good